evolved through...
Good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting instability. Alright, this evening, I'm just going to take a real simple step on this and give this boat, chariot, helicopter, and its occupant a nice light green contrasting aura, and perhaps a little bit of motion trailing behind the helicopter blades. Maybe, we'll see.
Which he describes as, more or less in the language of David Bohm's implicate order, that all time and all space is somehow exists as a interconnected ball of intelligence, which is, let's just assume such a thing. Nevertheless, the science of our colleagues is more or less a true story of evolution, that there was a change, that language did come upon us in a certain moment, that before that moment we didn't speak, afterwards we did, and so the question arises, and I think this is, in my interpretation, the question we started with here. How could it be that with or without a divine intervention that there is this more or less linear progress in human intelligence, culture, capability, tool using, and exponential population growth that is correlated without any causal implication with the descent of the novelty wave? Why do we have this peculiar artifact? This is an observational fact that there is this increase in complexity in civilization, apparently looking for a spectacular transformation, which we are associating with the word millennium now. What's going on?
Well, novelty theory would just say the universe is a complexity-conserving engine. Whatever complexity it achieves by any means, it makes that the platform for a further thrust into deeper complexity. If you don't like novelty theory...
Because the morphogenetic field never forgets.
It forgets a little, but it never... It can be set back, but it can never be set back to zero, and it always... Once it gets out of the ditch, it heads back in the same direction. It has a vector field preference. And then you mentioned David Bohm. His idea of emergent properties seems to achieve the same end without a telos of novelty theory. He simply says when you complexify a system, new properties will emerge suddenly and unexpectedly that couldn't have been predicted. If you put emergence theory with novelty theory, you see that the universe could not but proceed along the line of complexification of morphogenetic expression, density of connectivity, and all the things that retard entropy and give rise to, in fact, the complex, non-entropic, ordered, apparently teleologically informed cosmos that we're in.
Well, now we see then that what you've described is... It was one of those verbs, was a bit extraordinary.
Okay.
That there is then revealed kind of evolutionary theory as a cosmological hypothesis. This is a theological position, basically. That there is a timeless implicate order. And there is life on planet Earth and in the rest of the universe, which evolves according to this theoretical rule by an increase of complexity. When something is revealed, there's a development. It's not forgotten. It builds upon that. And this mystical unit, well, knowing all, is not telling all, but revealing gradually, because just that's the law of life as we know it.
In three-dimensional space and time. With Rupert and I, really, from my point of view, the only difference between the morphogenetic field that he has enthusiastically proposed and the ideas of novelty theory is, for Rup, it's pushed from the past. For me, it's pulled from the future.
Well, that's what Teddy was saying in this book.
No, but what you get at the end of the day is the same thing. It's just a matter of preference and how much of orthodoxy you want to grind against. The phobia against telos is an artifact of 19th century deism and doesn't go very deep. And you described the complexification of the universe as self-evident, and I believe it is self-evident, and the failure of science to address this is what makes it so frustrating and imprecise so late in the game.
But the trouble with the emergence view you've been putting forward is that it's still very earthbound. You see, there's obviously been a major emergence of complexity in human culture. There's also been a huge emergence of complexity in the Amazon jungle and the Malayan rainforest, arguably far greater than anything we've achieved through technology, and millions of species of beetles, insects, plants, and so forth. But it seems to me that long before all these things happened on Earth, we've got the possibility of much higher levels of consciousness outside the Earth. And as you know, I'm a devotee of the idea of the sun as conscious. And the stars. If you take the materialist view that consciousness interfaces with the brain through complex electromagnetic patterns of activity, then those on the sun, which we're learning more and more about every day, have unbelievably complex chaotic patterns, resonant patterns of acoustic waves going through the sun, polar reversals every 11 years, resonant patterns of electromagnetic waves. My thinking about this was much influenced by a science fiction novel by Fred Hoyle, published in the 50s, called The Black Cloud, where Fred Hoyle shows that to imagine intelligence necessarily grounded either in copper wires and computers or in nerve cells and brains is a limitation of this. So you could have an intelligent system working through a plasma, an electrically charged cloud, and indeed, I think, through something like the sun. So if the sun is in fact conscious, if stars have a kind of consciousness, then of course it raises questions, well, what do they think about? What do they do with this consciousness? But it's very likely that the kind of consciousness they have will be at a vastly higher level than our own. So when we're talking about the emergence of higher consciousness in human beings, it's not as if for the first time in the universe some higher level of consciousness emerges. It could be that for the first time in the history of the solar system, our minds somehow contact the sort of intelligence, much greater intelligence that exists out there. And because I think it's possible to think of the stars and the sun as conscious, and then galaxies as conscious, you don't need to go straight beyond the universe to the divine mind. There's plenty of lower level minds than the divine mind that could be out there. And of course, traditional views of spirits and angels tell us that there are many, many, many innumerable levels of intelligence beyond our own within the galaxy, many associated with the stars. So we don't necessarily have to have the idea it's all happened and emerged on Earth through a complexification. We can have a thing, we reach a point where there's like a spark passes between a terrestrial consciousness, a human one, with more interconnected halves of the brain, people in the first throes of mind-boggling mushroom trip, etc. But somehow, whatever happens, there's this, like a spark, a connection established. And it seems to me that this hypothesis has the great advantage of actually accounting for what's believed all around the world, namely that there is some connection between human intelligence and that of the sky. Because in terms of imagination, you see, predators and we're human beings were both predators and prey. But so are lots of other animals, and presumably any hunting animal has to have the imagination and the ability to identify with the prey. In fact, René Thom, years ago, produced a mathematical model of predator and prey, where there has to be a kind of internalization of the prey in the predator's mind in order to get the right strategy. This is not specifically human, and it's not enough as a basis of the imagination. I think this connection with realms beyond the human would give such an enlarged scope for imagination that to take literally what so many people around the world say in their myths seems to me the simplest hypothesis.
Well, I'm more friendly to this idea of non-biologically based forms of consciousness than I was the last time we talked, because of this fact I mentioned, that I now think wherever there is a sufficiently complex informational environment, the functions of life, self-replication, etc., mutation, adaptation, can go on. But obviously most of the intelligence in the universe would be utterly incomprehensible to us because it is so different. So we're transducing virtually the entire hologram of possible intelligence in the universe, but the reason our fantasies of angels and aliens give us hominids with binocular vision who use acoustical speech, in other words, creatures very similar to ourselves, is because we only can recognize what is familiar in this universal information field. So we sail right past the star mind, the galaxy mind, to communicate with a race of winged hominids around Zenebel Ganubi Prime, simply because they are enough like us that we can grok our possibility of a relationship.
It seems to me that this is just very begging the question in a traditional and cheap fashion, because...
Oh, good, Ralph.
I mean, I'm all in favor of celestial intelligence, and in fact, I could even entertain a conversation with a Pleiadian, I don't mind. But the question, I mean, we started with the problem of evolution. The evolutionary mind is in fact the title of our book, and the question of the evolution, the progress, or even the origin of all these things is our ultimate question. Now, if our view is local to planet Earth, we can say, okay, we're being taught by bolts from the blue, and we have these, meddling celestial intelligence that are reaching out, pretend to be Bell and tell us Bell's theorem, give us mushrooms, pretend to be sent from the solar wind or whatever. But where do they come from? The evolutionary problem, then, is just transferred onto another, more remote place. Now, as I understand, Rupert's idea of the morphogenetic field is that these other places are also in evolution, and the whole system is in co-evolution, and that is an attempt, I think, one of the first ones in the history of intelligent discourse on this subject, the first attempt to get rid of the hypothesis of timeless truth.
But if you get rid of that hypothesis, you have a whole bunch of weird problems, such as then you have to talk about the speed of propagation of novelty or morphogenetic fields, and then you're slammed to the wall because you have to either come up with a number which you fit into a mathematical architecture, or you say that it's instantaneous, which returns you to this holistic, more metaphysical thing. If you don't believe that it's coming from the Bell space, then you have a whole bunch of these kinds of problems, which I think intuitively make it too complicated.
Let it be instantaneous. I mean, I think the whole question of time is, in fact, behind this problem, that we have this idea about time, and then we're trying to talk about a timeless. So one way to eliminate this cognitive dissonance is to say, okay, there is no timeless, it's all in co-evolution, and we're a little bit behind the evolution of the Pleiadians, and then, well, where does that come from? We're stuck with the problem. So I think, you were talking of the attractor at the end of time is more or less the beyond time is the intelligence that it informs, that nourishes the accumulation of complexity as we go along, apparently in time.
Well, I think the attractor is complete in and of itself in another dimension. The process of history and biological evolution is the growing complex enough to grow toward the thing and understand it.
So is our process of growth then nourished or not nourished by some flow of something that comes from this attractor at the end of time in another dimension?
It contributes the trajectory of our approach. It defines the domain in which we are moving toward it.
We couldn't even talk this without chaos theory.
No, the chaos theory stands behind this very powerful.
Well, I don't know, Ralph, people have been talking about this for a long time before chaos theory came along.
But in such a muddled fashion.
compared with the sublime clarity of our present conclusion.
Precisely.
So I don't quite see why chaos theory is an essential ingredient.
Forget chaos theory. I'm interested in the possibility that in your deepest musings on this problem, you have rather avoided Father Bede's challenge to grapple with infinity, and that in the idea of the coevolution of morphogenetic fields begs the question of the existence of timeless or eternal truth, pattern, guidance, or something, which is, well,
But are you,
I don't know.
I mean, Father Bede used the word mystical, but of course he was a priest. I don't think he meant the essentially incomprehensible. In other words, I don't think we're going to get to a place where we then say, from here on it is mystery and rational apprehension fails. My notion of the mystical is simply that which remains to be understood, and there will always be a residuum of mystery in principle, but in principle it is not mysterious.
No, I think, I don't agree with that, I must say. I think
Well, you might not.
Well, we'd soon be out of business if we're talking at the edge of the unthinkable, if we actually, everything suddenly becomes thinkable.
Even in principle?
I think that, given the nature of a human mind, evolved to deal with large predators, hunting on African plains, gathering herbs, etc., dealing with social problems, human relationships, etc. The idea that this evolution has equipped us with minds and language and cognitive abilities that enable us to comprehend the entire universe, where it's come from, where it's going, what minds and mind may lie beyond what we see. The idea that this very small part of the evolutionary system, with all the limitations inherent in it, could comprehend the whole, seems to me a rather improbable supposition. And I think that the point about mysticism, or what the Greek church calls apophatic, that is that the ultimate, in the end, does lie beyond what we can think. Our thinking can only take us so far. And this isn't just because we haven't got enough professors of mathematics yet, and it's only a matter of bigger computers and so forth. But there are grave limits on how far a very limited and evolutionary bound conceptual apparatus can take us. We'd never be able to embrace, as you yourself pointed out, the kind of mentality of the sun or a galaxy, because its concerns are so much greater and more remote than our own, let alone the universe as a whole.
But in principle, some other form of organization could. In other words, these things are not sealed from understanding in principle. They are simply difficult for primate-based minds running limited software at low hertz rate to accommodate.
But yes, but I mean, if presumably the solar mind, if there is one, could understand, have a pretty good intuitive understanding of the minds of other suns. And if the sun has a mind, part of its activity, I think, would be concerned with the solar system. It would be like the brain of the solar system. But part of its activity would be concerned with its peer group, namely other stars. And then part of their activity would be related to the mind or purpose or telos of the entire galaxy. And those kinds of concerns, you know, the kind of relationship problems that our sun may be having with other suns, or double star systems like that of Sirius, the kind of
relationship problem.
Those are rather beyond the scope of human psychotherapy, or indeed human thought. There may be so many things going on, as indeed there are at levels we don't really understand very well the world of the goldfish or the ant. So there are certain limitations which I don't think are just a temporary limitation on what we can conceive or imagine.
Well then, until we run out of energy to conceive and imagine, are we conceiving of the solar mind, if it exists, as evolving or fixed?
Yeah, it must evolve.
It must evolve perhaps on a different time scale, which is the time scale of a relationship in their own community,
Yeah.
which is the 15 billion year linear time frame since the Big Bang. Is that what you're thinking? That we're coming to the crux of it here?
Well, I think the evolution of the solar mind would be related to what happens here, because we're part of the solar system. And I would assume that because all planets and everything that's happening within the solar system feeds back and influences the solar mind, that it would somehow, it's not just the mind of the sun, it's the mind of the solar system.
But it's evolving since the birth of the Milky Way and
that's right, and what's going on here is part of its evolution. We're within it and contributing to it.
So the morphogenetic field then of the all and everything had a birth moment with the Big Bang. Is that what you're thinking, or?
Well, I'm assuming that if we take the Big Bang theory to be, if we assume there was a Big Bang, I know you're very skeptical about the Big Bang, it's only a story, it's a myth, but if we take this creation myth of modern science, then that must be the birth of the field of the whole system. Yes. And modern physics in the unified field theory, superstring theory, tries to explain how you start with a unified 10-dimensional field that then evolves the other fields of nature within it. So we thought that's standard physics. I mean, it's not part of my particular view of things.
But with the consciousness of this all and everything, I mean, the solar minds contribute to the consciousness of the Milky Way, which is one galaxy, which it then has the psychotherapist in its relationship with the nearby galaxy.
Yes, in the galactic cluster.
And actually there's a synchrony of thought due to the fact that Bell's theorem connects them from the Big Bang and so on.
But isn't all you're saying is that the universe is a modular hierarchy from atom through cells, societies?
I'm challenging you to answer where the morphogenesis comes from that leads to complexity and things like the birth of life, if it's simply the co-evolution of a physical system since the Big Bang.
Novelty theory has answered this question. It comes
To
from
the satisfaction of your mind and all smaller.
Well, at least to the satisfaction of someone.
But it doesn't explain either the origin of the novelty wave itself, nor does it, you see, there are many models, of course, of cosmic evolution. One of them is that because you have the cosmic expansion, that for some reason the primal explosion, Big Bang, throws everything apart, so it's all moving apart. That means things cool down. As they cool down, more form and order can appear, and it literally makes more space for things to happen in. That the arrow of time, the arrow of evolutionary time, and the driving engine of evolution is the cosmic expansion, which means nothing can ever be stable, can never stay the same, because the whole cosmos is unstable. It's always expanding and cooling. And given that, through all sorts of phase transitions, as you cool a plasma down, as atoms appear, and then as gases condense to liquids and liquids to solids, the cooling process involves the appearance of more order, more form. When there was less before, there was very little, the moment of the Big Bang. So the cooling and expansion more or less force the appearance of more structure, pattern, order. And you could say that that gives scope for creativity all the time. There's always the scope for new things to happen. And there's a long-standing debate among evolutionary theorists as to whether this is following a pre-established plan, or being drawn towards an already existing future goal, or following a pre-existing set of laws or rules, like the novelty wave, or whether it's all being made up as it goes along. And I'm much influenced in my thinking by Bergson, the Henri Bergson. In his book Creative Evolution, he very strongly defends the idea it's all being made up as it goes along. That doesn't mean to say that around the evolutionary process are not minds and imagination, but it makes the creative process of evolution more interesting rather than less, because it's not decided what's going to happen next. There are imaginations of many levels, including human imaginations at work here, looking at alternative possibilities. New things happen, and then what happens next depends on what's happened already, and the new possibilities of imagination that open up, but without the goal being fixed in advance.
No, I have no problem with that. I don't see how, for instance, someone could hypothesize that all of the laws came into existence simultaneous with the Big Bang. For example, did the laws of gene segregation come into being a billion years before biology existed anywhere in the universe? That seems naive and preposterous. Whitehead had this idea of what he called the aboriginal God. What we call natural laws are simply habits of a very ingrained sort, and habits can change, and in more dynamic regimes, a mind, a society, habits can change overnight. So what is given is that there shall be ever greater complexity. What is not given is how this complexity shall arrange itself, or what the final end state will be. It's a story that's being told as it unfolds. It's a game whose one of the rules of which is the rules can change. How are we doing here time-wise?
Good.
Good.
Real good.
Good.
Well, we're getting nowhere. In other words, this is the problem in the desert. It's ticking by itself, or God put it there, we don't know.
All right, well, that about wraps up this session. It's not done. It's getting close, but I think it needs some more detailing, and not sure all what else yet. We'll stare at it for a while and figure out the next step. But that's it for the moment. Thank you for watching. It's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, Mexico, working on oil painting instability. Have a good night, Earth.